Friends of Airtable, hello, welcome to another video. Today we write a script together for removing duplicates based on a specific table and a specific field. Let's do it. So here we have a little bit of an outline. We want to remove duplicates based on a table and a field, but also according to the created time in order to select keeping the oldest or youngest record. So let's say we have 10 records and we want to find if there are 10 duplicate records. We want to select whether we want to keep the first one that got created or the last one that got created. 4 steps. We create an input config, which is a great tool in Airtable to get some user input. In our case, select the table, select the field, select the created time field, and say select whether we want to keep the oldest or youngest record. Then we load the records, we create an array of our duplicate records, and we delete those records. Let's do it. So we're here in Airtable, in our table. What I want to do is I want to select unique values based on the nodes field. As you can see, I have a lot of ABC nodes and a lot of DEF nodes and GHY nodes. And basically in the end I only want to have 3 records because there are 3 unique values in this table. So let's write our script. Like always, you can go into the API settings down here, into the API documentation down here and see everything that we're doing documented there. The first thing we want to do is we want to define some settings. Let's call this config, and then we can access this via input.config. As you can see, Airtable recognizes that we're doing something here and wants us to give this a title, which we can. Called title, removing duplicates based on field, based on table and field. Yeah, not the best name in the world, but you know what I mean. Let's give this a description. Please select the table field, created time field, and whether you want to delete the first, you want to keep the first or last record. And this is actually not first or last, but youngest or oldest record. This is our description. And then we can pass it the option items via items. The first thing we want to do is we want the user to select a table. So we say input.config.table, and we need to give it a name. Let's call it table. And we could actually stop here and go to our next item. But I don't like that it doesn't have a capital T. So we can pass it some additional parameters like label, where we say a table. And now it has a capital T. And here I can select my tables. In my case, I have 3 tables in the base, and we go with table C. The second thing is we want to select the field, which is input.config.field. This we just call field. And here we need to pass it some additional arguments. Once again, a label, because I don't like that it doesn't give the name with a capital F in this case. And then we need to tell it where that field lives. All right, so we need to give it a parent table. It's called. And the parent table accepts the name of a table, which in our case is table with the small t. Third thing we want from the user is the created time field. So the user shall tell us where does the created time field live. So we say input.config.field. Let's call this created time. Label created time. We could also add a description here, by the way. Something like, please select a time field, a created time field in your table. And then we need to give this like a parent table as well, where we say table. So and now we can select the field here as well. And the last thing is we want the user to say whether we want to keep the youngest or oldest record, which is an input.config.select. And let's call this, let's call this youngest or oldest. Not the shortest name, but whatever. Label. Keep youngest or oldest record, question mark. It's more like a description, but whatever. We called it label. And here we need some options, and options come as an array of objects, and then there's a value in there. And one is the youngest, and then we put in another object, value, oldest. And then we can select the youngest or oldest here. Not oldest, but oldest. Let's console log our config to see what we get back here. So nodes, create time, yes, and youngest. And we run this, and we get everything that we have stored. Basically, youngest or oldest is youngest as we selected. We have the created time field, our primary field, let's say, where we want to check for duplicates in our table. Perfect. Now when we continue, I want to build a little bit of a check, which basically is a check whether the user, or I want to validate whether the user actually put in the created time field. Unfortunately, we can't do this like on here directly, but what we can do is we can say if config.created time, I think that's how it's called, right? Yes. Dot type is equal unequals created time, which we see here. So we get the field type basically. If that's the case, then we want to say really say something. We put out some markdown, and we say please choose a time field, and else we want to console log run our code. We should see run our code, which is good. Yeah, if we go on settings and we select the name field, for instance, and we run our code, then it's shouting at us and saying, please choose a time field. And I'm sure you find a better thing to say here than please choose a time field. But yeah, we are writing the rest of our code basically in here. You can do this with an if else. You can like do another if. There isn't really, as far as I know, a way to break an Airtable script. I mean, you can break it, but then you would probably also get an error, maybe. But yeah, anyways, there are many ways of doing this, but we do this with an if else, and the rest of our code lives in here. So we built our input config. Now let's load our records. So first we need to select our table, which we call, let's call it D table for a duplicates table. Say base get table. Now, of course, we don't pass it the name, or we don't hard code the name in, but we get the name from our config. So we get config dot table. And the auto completion doesn't work here, annoyingly. Table, and we need to pass it the ID. So for get table, you can and many other selection methods or selection functions in Airtable, you either pass it the name as a string or the ID as a string, basically. So this gives us our table, and now let's get our records. Duplicate or D table records equal to, this is asynchronous, so we need to say await dtable dot select records async. But we don't want all records. We want to say specifically which records from which field or which fields we want to select. No, sorry, we want to get all records, but we want to say which field we want to select, because per default, the select records async would give us all the fields in the table, which in our case isn't problematic because we only have 3 fields. But if you have 150 fields in a table, then it's much better and faster if you only select the fields that you actually need. In our case, we only need 1 field. So you can pass fields here, and this is an array of the field names or IDs. And the field ID we of course also get from our input config. So we say config.field.id. And thereby we're only selecting from the records that particular field. We said earlier that we also want a sorting order, and we want to sort according to created time. If you don't do that, Airtable is going to sort randomly, and you find that in the documentation actually under select records async, that the sort order is random. So you can pass it sorts, and under sorts we need an array of objects. The objects actually, why is it an array of objects? Because you can pass multiple sort fields basically. And here we need to say which field it is. In our case, it's input.config. I always say input.config, sorry. In our case, it's config.createdtime.id. That's the field we want to sort by. And then it has a second argument where it gets the, I always forget this, direction, exactly. And the direction we need to tell it basically ascending or descending. And in our case, we want ascending. And then we also need a comma. Let's see whether that works and whether we made, or if we made an error. Of course, we need to change our field here to create a time. That looks good. So we get something back from our select records async. Basically 2 arrays, an object of 2 arrays, and we are only interested in the records array. Because that's often the case that you're only interested in the records array, you can actually select the records array right away, because I also call it dtable records, right? So since it's asynchronous, we need to then say result records. And if you do that, we now only get the array of the actual objects. But I want to go a little bit further than that, because all of these will be unique, right? Because you can see that what we get per default is the record ID and the primary field name of the record. And in our case, that's not what we need, right? Because we don't want to check according to name, we want to check according to notes. So we actually want to build an array with ID and notes. The ID we need in order to delete the record if it's a duplicate. The notes field we need in order to find our duplicates and our unique values. How we do that is we basically map over this array that we have here. So we say map, we have records in there, so I call this rec, and then we want to give back an object again, which if we want to do this on one line, you can sort of give this back like this, but then you need a return, and we want to do this on one line, so we need brackets again, and then we pass it curly brackets for the object notation. And the first thing is actually an ID, where we write in the rec ID, and the second thing is our notes field value, which we get by say, let's call this field. So this is an arbitrary name, and then it's rec. We get the cell value, and here we could of course give it now just the name, but we don't need that because we got it from the user in this case again. So we can say config.field.id. I think it's called field. I should have named this better and not just field, but I think hopefully you can still follow me. So field.id. So now instead of getting an array of objects with ID and name, we should get an array of objects with ID and field. And in the field, we should have our field values if everything works well. Looks good. So we get our ID and the field. Very, very good. So now let's find duplicate values. Let's find duplicate values by finding unique values first, right? Because that's that's often an easier way to sort of look for what's unique in here and then just reverse what we've done. So let's call this unique, actually not values, sorry, unique records. And we want to find unique records by filtering our array of elements in our table. So we have our dtable records, we say .filter. That's the array method we are using. Open brackets. And then what do we have in here? Like record, so every record we are looping over and something needs to happen. We want to use something which is pretty handy. We can not only only pass it sort of one argument here, we can actually pass it up to 3 arguments. The first is the element we're looping over. The second is the index we're at. And the first one is the array that we started with. So in our case, the dtable records, all the records that we have in our table. So these are like, that's basically what JavaScript offers us. And we want to say, we want to find unique values. So we want to say, give me only those back where the index of the record, basically in the array, we can check the index of the record where that is equal to the index of the loop where we are currently. So why does that work? Like index of gives us the first index at which a particular record exists, right? So if it's at index 0 and at 1, like on those two, then in this case it would only pass 0 for the first loop, but not at 1, because this is still 0, and therefore it would not be part of our array and would get filtered out. So only where our current loop index is equal to the index of the first item, unique item in the array. Let's do this. We also need to console log unique records. Damn, we get 21 objects as well. So apparently not so unique, which makes a lot of sense because these objects are not unique, right? Because they still have the record ID, and the record ID, of course, in Airtable is always unique, right? So we have basically no duplicate objects among here, or we have no unique objects. Let's put it like that, because that's what we were looking for. We have no unique objects in our array because we have a record ID, and that is always different. That's also not what we wanted to compare, right? We didn't want to compare the record ID and the field. We only wanted to compare the field. So actually, we're not comparing the entire record, but only like rec.field. So if we want to use our index of approach, we kind of need to change our array first, right? We get an array here where we can use map again, where we say like the element in here, let's say the element in here, we only want the element.field, right? So we're basically only selecting this. And if the index of this array, this basically gives us an array back. If the index of rec.field, so now we're searching for rec.field in that array, which only contains these field names now. If that is equal to the index we had in the loop, then we keep it. And that should give us unique values. There we go. So now we had 3, basically what we wanted, right? 1 for ABC, 1 for GHY, 1 for DEF. There's a bit of a white space here, by the way. So let's actually trim this. I think it's here. We're passing this in. See? Yeah, that's good. So always when you're copy pasting, this can happen. So now we have our unique records. But we want to remove, right? We want to delete records in the end. So actually we don't want to find unique records. We actually want to find duplicate records. If I run this, of course, these are not duplicate records now. These are the unique records. How do I find the duplicate records? It's pretty simple because we're just reversing basically what we've done. So we say where it's unequals I, where it's unequals the index in the loop currently. And if I do that, I get 18 objects back. And these are exactly the 18 objects that we don't want to include in the end. So we found our duplicate records, which is very good. What have we done here? We have selected our duplicate records. Based on what? If we would go back and find our unique records, just to do that, I mean, it's still called duplicate, but you know what I want to do. Unique records, so the unique ABC record has this record ID. So let me quickly find this record ID. Record ID. So the unique value is this ABC record. It's basically the oldest, right? It exists the longest. 1248 is older than all the other ones. So that's the one I want to keep, or this is the way we need to do it if the user has selected oldest. Keep youngest or oldest record, keep oldest. So this is what we need if we want to keep the oldest. Let me actually turn this back so we get our duplicate values, and then we can say here if config dot how is it called, youngest or oldest is equal to oldest. Actually, we don't need the brackets here. I don't think we have an else. Actually, let me declare the duplicate records above here. Something like this. Null. And then let me say duplicate record equals this. This sounds better. Let's actually oldest, and it still works. Perfect. If config dot youngest or oldest is equals youngest, then we kind of want to reverse this. So then we kind of want to do the same thing, but we don't want to find index of, but last index of. So instead of finding the first item, we want to find the last in the array. So it's exactly reversed. And if I'm just turning this around as well again, I'm giving unique values, and sorry that this is still called duplicate values, but duplicate records, but I'm only getting unique records here for the time being. And let me actually also select youngest and then run this. Let's see what value for ABC we get back now when I have reversed this with last index of. I get this one, which sort of I've created all of these at the same time, so it's a bit screwed. But seconds wise and milliseconds wise, this is going to be the oldest one, so the one that got created last. So it's exactly reversed. And if someone now say, give me keep the youngest one of the records, which we've said here, then this code is actually very correct. Let me turn it back. And we get the reverse, so only the duplicate records. Oops, and then the last thing we need to do is delete duplicate records. Let me also call this records. I always say values for some reason. Records. Let's console log the, oh no, we still have it here. We need our ID. We have the ID in field. If we want to delete records in Airtable, we need to pass it an array of record IDs. So you can see this in the documentation. If you go on delete records async, here in the example, we just pass it an array of record IDs. So basically, we can say duplicate records equals duplicate records.map where rec.id. And then console log this duplicate records. So we just get an array of record IDs. And this we can now pass to the function in Airtable. So we say while duplicate records is length is greater than 0. Let's do something. Let's await dtable.delete records async, and we have our duplicate records.slice 050. By the way, if you don't know what this is and why we're doing this, I have another video for this where I show how to create multiple records, like more than 50 records, but it's the same for deleting and updating records. So if you want to delete, update, or create more than 50 records at a time, then you need to sort of do that in batches of 50. And this is a way of doing, like, of passing it only batches of 50 records at a time until there are none left. The duplicate record is duplicate records.slice 50. So basically, first we are only taking the first 50, and then we're slicing the array to not take those records again. In our case, not really necessary because we only have 18. Anyway, still did it. Let's do it. Let's see if it works. So we have selected. Let's actually keep the oldest. I like that more. And let's run it. Bam, and they're gone. And our code works. And we have deleted duplicate records based on a field and a table. I know this was a bit of a longer video. If you have any questions how to do this for 2 fields or like anything else you want to ask regarding the code, just always let me know. And hope you enjoyed this, and see you next time. Bye.